Hi there, it's Tuck, Hidden Values. Welcome to day 10 of our Liberty Vigil, the 28th of June, 2020. I want to talk tonight about statues and history and its discontents. We're taking down all the statues now, or some of us are, and we've always left up some statues and taken them down, but we haven't always done it this way. And it's distressing, I think, to a lot of us, and disturbing, and it should be. I live up north, and up here in my Yankee part of the country, most of our small towns have statues on the town square that aren't all that controversial. At least from my perspective, there's not a particular reason for them to be. I know that from my perspective, as someone who's from the northern part of the country and always has been, if I lived in a southern part of the country, I think it would be easier for me to understand the difficulty that parts of the community would have walking by Confederate statues. I think it would be difficult. In the same reason, it's very easy for me to understand why the Confederate flag is difficult for a lot of people. I'm not a big fan of seeing the Confederate flag flying. I'm a big fan of states' rights, but there are other flags and other expressions that embody that, and the Confederate flag is really a mixed bag. I'm always glad when I see it disappear off people's homes, and I'm always nervous when I see it go up. That doesn't mean I think people should be disallowed from flying it, obviously. I'm a big free speech advocate and a big First Amendment advocate, but I'm always more glad to see it go away. Here where I live, our town square has a lot of things that happen there that are community events, right? We gather for Friday night football and homecoming parades and Christmas lights and snowball fights and summer street fair and the Saturday farmers market. And because we gather for those things, we want to gather around various emblems and monuments and statues and trees and fountains and other things that we are honoring and holding in high esteem, and things that represent our values today. The values of this community that's gathered here today on the town square. The fact is, we need to do that without disowning the history that we share. If we happen to be here and we're in the Union that for the moment is still together, then the Union soldier statue that's looking off in the great distance toward the south may not be an object of a lot of controversy. But if we happen to be in the southern part of the country, where we have Confederate statues and emblems, that might be a really different perspective, particularly for people who come from ancestors who were enslaved, and who look at those statues as emblems of folks who were fighting, at least in part, to maintain the status quo situation that would keep their ancestors enslaved. The difficulty is that I'm not sure we're a whole lot more clear thinking or decisively acting here up north, because the fact is, in southern and northern cities, all over this country, there are statues tumbling and crumbling while the residents bow and scrape to tyrants that are tearing them down with little or no regard for who those statues are of or what they represent. We need to distinguish between maintaining our history and the record of our history intact in museums, which must be done because we need to be able to reality test in generations to come our best collection of perceptions and stories from all perspectives of what actually has happened and where we have actually been. If we destroy our records and our emblems of previous times, then it's very, very hard for us to move forward in a way that has integrity and wisdom. And we also need to honor the desire to have the public spaces where we gather together as a community reflect the values that we have in the community now. There are ways to navigate that combination of needs in intelligent and kind, loving ways, but we need to actually do them, which means that we have to defend both of those needs with integrity and not just swing wildly on the pendulum from one end of what that need is to the other end, which seems to be where we're caught right now. Nikki Haley, I think a few years ago in South Carolina as the governor, presided over a very civilized process of removing the Confederate flag from over the State House because it didn't represent what a majority of South Carolinians thought the State House was gathered under in terms of its values. But they haven't burned every Confederate flag in the state of South Carolina. No one's trying to pretend like it never existed or like all the things that it stood for have been wiped out. That would be ridiculous. It would be tyrannical. It would be an Orwellian attempt at rewriting history, which can't be done. History is what it is, and it was what it was. This week in Mississippi, from the end of last week through this weekend, they're in the middle of the process, and into next week, they're looking at it, considering different designs for the state flag, because it still has a Confederate emblem as part of the state flag. They're under pressure from the SEC and the NCAA. No championship events are going to be held in any states that are still upholding this emblem. So that's what's brought them to the table. But whatever it is, the fact is they're undertaking the process in a civilized way. They're not just allowing mobs to run around crashing things to the ground and burning them and destroying them. And good for them. As somebody who doesn't have a personal dog in this fight, as a Yankee, I think it's really important that we move forward with more sanity and less bloodshed from both sides. Rational dialogue among duly elected public representatives is what our constitutional republic calls for in these kinds of debates and discussions, whether it's about statues or flags or legal language or permissions around freedom of expression. If you think that those people who represent you aren't serving you, then fire them at election time, regardless of which side of these issues that you're on. If you think they are criminally, grossly defrauding you in between election time, recall them. Or if we need to up the ante, we might consider docking their pay at tax time if we have to take drastic action against people who are wildly corrupt. If you yourself are harming people or their property wholesale in the streets, you are off the beam. As my friend Val used to say, they're not just off the beam, they've been hit with the beam. The constitutional American resistance is going to hold our elected officials accountable for holding you, the violent offenders against our laws and liberty, accountable. We have several layers of accountability provided for in this country. We're going to use them. There isn't a way to change our history. It was what it was, and it's going to be what it is, regardless of how we record it or don't record it. We can lie about it, or we can each tell the truth as best we know it about the parts that we remember, that we saw, that our families have lived through. Or we can do something in between. We can tell half-truths. We can put our history in perspective in a museum, in a memorial park or a garden, or we can leave it on a main street, or we can store it in a library, or we can look at it in a town square for the parts of it that we want to keep central and maintain as part of the values we continue to uphold and under whose influence we continue to move forward. But it isn't going to go anywhere. And the people that made the history were people just like us. They were courageous, and they were cowardly, and they were flawed, and they were broken, and they were smart, and they were foolish, and they were educated, and they were ignorant, and they were in the image of God, just like every single one of us. if we are smart and we are wise and we use the better angels of our nature, as people say, we will be able to come together and make decisions about how to handle the records of our history in ways that will serve our future. Before I close, I want to do a little shout out to Carl Woods. I think I have him right, who is a new subscriber to the channel. Looking out at his channel, he has a video posted from PragerU, and it was posted on Memorial Day, which was the last day of relative calm that we've seen in our country this year. It was a month ago, and roughly. And it's a great video. It's called The Fallen Soldier, and it's really beautiful, and it's dedicated to all the folks who've made the ultimate sacrifice to preserve our peace and freedom and our sanity. So go out, check it out, look at it. Thanks, Carl, for joining the channel. Welcome. And I hope that if all of you are appreciating this content, you will like and subscribe, share this, pass it along to someone else, and please contribute to the conversation with your comments. I appreciate communicating with all of you, and hopefully you can communicate with one another as well. Thank you. Have a good night. It's Sunday night, so hopefully you will all go into this next week a little bit rested and prepared for whatever greets us going forward. Thank you. Good night. Rest well. I'll see you tomorrow.